This morning, this is the workshop put on by the City of Bartlett Historical Preservation Commission. And the first person we're going to have speak this morning is Miss Judith Johnson. Come on up here.
All righty.
She is native to Tennessee, but not West Tennessee.
Not West Tennessee.
Not West Tennessee.
I'm a hillbilly.
That's it, not West Tennessee. You are on the Tennessee Historical Commission Coordinator.
No, actually, I'm an architectural historian, and I've never actually been that. The Tennessee is that you, Jane? Oh,
That's you.
There we go.
So I apologize.
It's all right.
Okay. So you are an architectural historian, and you have a degree in art history. And as we were talking earlier, I just heard in your voice that you just have a heart for history. And so that is what you're going to share with us this morning.
Absolutely.
Okay. So please welcome Judith Johnson.
Thank you. Is it possible that we could maybe kill a few of these lights?
Yes, that's what I'm going to do.
Oh, thank you.
Am I going to be in your way?
No.
Okay.
Well, it's really great to be here. Bartlett is such a special place. You all have so much history here, and it goes back to the very earliest settlement of West Tennessee. So I think that the fact that this area has been so historic, and at one time when the city of Memphis was founded, it was really floundering, and they actually moved Raleigh, which is a separate city, stole the courthouse from downtown in Memphis, and they built it out here. So if you go to historic Raleigh today, which is kind of there at Stage and Austin P, I guess, there is this historic cemetery, and the Grahams, who were major founders here. We have Graham Street. A lot of Grahams are buried there in the cemetery, and it really saddens me that cemetery was given over to someone and has not really been maintained at all. But so unfortunate that burial grounds are often that way. So today what we're going to talk about is I wanted to look at the early housing types and styles that kind of were predominant in this area, and in particular to Bartlett. So since I am from East Tennessee, we are going to look at the Midland Log House. And these are generally one-room cabins. They're called pens, technically. And my family actually did settle up in the Smokies. This is not the family home, however. What you see here, of course, is hewn wood construction, because you don't have sawmills. Sawmills came in after 1840 and just completely revolutionized housing in West Tennessee. But as you can see, the ends of the building are joined together kind of like Lincoln logs. This is not a dovetail, but the best houses have a dovetail on them, and that's the end of the log has a place for the water to run off, because it's water collecting on the ends of the logs that cause deterioration. If you go out to Davies Manor, the only log cabin that we still have kind of in this area, you'll see that they have come in, and instead of using wattle, which would be sand and mud, they have used concrete, which also deteriorates the logs over time. So if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. You generally have an exterior chimney, and then if you add a room on the other side, you get a double pen, and then you see the chimney coming out of the middle. So you'll often notice that in the older housing types around in the area. Oh yes, here we go. So this is Davies Manor. It was built about 1830. It's actually the Henderson Royster Davies homestead. This is a wonderful photograph I was able to find. It was a two-story dog trot, and the second story is filled in, and later on Miss Ellen filled in the first story there, and that's where your center hall plan comes from that you generally see after 1840. But the brothers, I think the Hendersons or Mr. Royce or one of these guys, had fought in the Civil War and came back. One of them came back, and I guess they didn't really recognize post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSS, because he was just bonkers, okay? And they were doctors. So I don't think his marriage lasted a long time after he came back from the war, and all of that was very unhappy, but that's one of those fallouts of war that happened to the actual soldiers rather than the people in charge. So if you want to see our best remaining example here in Shelby County of a log cabin, you can go out and visit Davies Manor. It is a historic home today.
Ma'am?
Yes.
What year were those pictures taken?
That actually was taken in 1910. The one where it's still log. The guy on the left here is taken, well, actually, what does it say, 1918?
Oh, that's, okay.
And there's snow on the ground. Sounds like a country song, doesn't it? In the 1930s, there's just so much and so little time. Let me see what we're doing on time. Okay, so in the 1930s, everybody decided to go Williamsburg. We, as a country, started looking back at our centennial and the origins of the country, and they decided colonial revival was the way to go. So many of our historic houses, people came in and tried to make them look like historic Williamsburg. So Miss Ellen came in and put on a colonial revival two-story front porch, taking away the original porch there and filled it in and trimmed out the windows differently and wallpapered it. But if you go out there, you can still see the horsehair and plaster on the walls, on the interior. They were redoing the wallpaper. I went out there to consult with them one time. All right, next slide. The other really ancient house we have around here is the McGivney House, which is downtown on Adams Street. Once again, I think this photograph up at the top probably dates to about the same time, 1915, 1920. And this home was built by Eugene McGivney. He was an Irish immigrant, a school teacher, a Catholic, and this house sits next door to St. Peter's Cathedral. McGivney got engaged before he left Ireland. Took him 10 years to get his bride here. So she finally comes over in the 1840s. They have the first Catholic wedding in Memphis in this house. And as you can see, it's a quintessential Southern house up there. You've got this is a double pile cabin, basically, I guess, with the chimneys on each end. But you have the porch coming down. It was actually an incised porch. And in the south, that's so great. It keeps you out of the sun. The rain just runs off the house. I mean, it's the perfect, environmentally sound house, actually, for the South before electricity. So there's also up in the I believe that this was housing up in the attic. I actually think that it was a separate apartment, but generally the kids or the servants or whomever would sleep upstairs, and that would be accessed by a ladder inside. But once again, the 1930s, Rockefeller and Henry Ford did Dearborn and Williamsburg. So what do? They whack off the house and they expose the front of the house to the elements. So today, this belongs to the Memphis Park Service, and there's constant deterioration of the front of the building. They're constantly rebuilding the lintels. They've got French drains in there. They've tried everything to deal with the moisture problem. So if you have a historic house with one of these old forms, you can't just arbitrarily come in and go, well, I don't like the way that looks. And you can't do that to a ranch house by putting shutters on it either, but that's another story. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is the last one. This guy is really old. The center, as you can see, actually is the same hall and parlor that the McGivney house was, which is 2 rooms joined by an interior door. And that too had a attic that the children slept in. This, of course, has been redone over time. But the oldest part is just fabulous. It has these 12-foot ceilings and beautiful hardwood floors. It's pretty astonishing. But it was probably 4 bays is what I thought, but it's been changed over time. And once again, we're going to put a colonial revival porch on because colonial revival is just so cool. So this too dates to 1840. All of these are after the settlement of Bartlett, actually. Next slide, please. Okay, so Bartlett is on the stage road. It's basically I guess you would call it like a rest stop on stage road, which was set up as a post road going from Somerville to Memphis. It was the last part of a stage road that would take you all the way across the state of Tennessee. You could go to Nashville on it. So the train comes in probably about 1850. That's pretty much when trains hit Shelby County. And it starts growing. It was originally 3 plantations. It was, let me see who it was. Well, all right, the Ohio Railroad, 1850. So 3 settlers come in. This was originally a single plantation that was claimed in 1822 by a gentleman named William Pope, who was a he was a Revolutionary War veteran, and the state of North Carolina, because we were part of North Carolina at that time, deeded it to him. So then he starts selling it off, because what are you going to do with these huge plantations but sell them off? So he sold it to a gentleman named James Pruden, who was from North Carolina, who moved here with his family, and he purchased part of the plantation. And then Major Bartlett came here in about the same time in the 1850s, and he ended up with about 500 acres of what would become the city of Bartlett. So this house began as a vernacular house with no particular style. Today you can see that it's been Victorianized, and I think it's probably about, he's not in the 1860 census, but his son and his son's wife are here, and they have 7,000 acres with $23,000, which is a lot of money back then. So basically, they're not necessarily the original builders, but certainly one of the early occupants of this house. So the earliest documentation I could find was an 1867 civil court decree regarding a partition there was a fight between 2 of the kids over this. And all of these are the very earliest settlers of Bartlett. There's Virginia, who married Dr. Nicholas Backwell, the Yates family, and the Wards. So this, if you want to look for your pioneer house in Bartlett, this is probably it. This is before the city of Bartlett was actually even platted. Next slide, please. All right, here it is. So we were talking when I got here about the town square, which you could kind of see. Sorry about the pointer I don't have, but it would be right there. So you would actually have your town square, and who said that it's basically where we are. It's the school, but it was public land, and of course they would put a school here. So as you can see, it's all parceled out nicely along the stage road, and then there's Major Bartlett's house. So Major Bartlett, as far as I could tell, was kind of hot. He's like 6'4", has brown hair and blue eyes, and plays the fiddle, and pretty cool guy. He was good to the poor. Youth loved to come to his house. I mean, what more can you say about a guy? He was a pretty astute businessman, but mostly he ran a tavern that was located down on Stage Road, where that shopping center that I didn't really see the name of, but it's just right behind us over there. So that was where the stagecoach would come through, and so he lived there with his wife. His first wife died in childbirth. So he lived there with his son, probably some other family members, and then he opened it up as a tavern. So, people that were coming through on the stagecoach would stay there. So that was kind of the beginning of Bartlett as like, okay, we've got the railroad, we've got the stage road, we have all these itinerants coming through, and they're going to want to eat and drink. So this is the beginning of the town of Bartlett and the entertainment center, I guess, as it were. So Major Bartlett, unfortunately, ran into a lot of financial difficulty, and he goes from being a wealthy man. By this time, he's had to sell this much of his land to 2 other guys. Let's see what their names are. I never heard. Oh, it's Dr. Nicholas Blackwell and a gentleman named William T. Payne. So they're the ones that actually plat the town of Bartlett and start selling off the property. So Major Bartlett goes from bad to worse. ends up dying insane in the 1870s, poor man. But here's your town originally. I think it was, what I say here, it was 113 lots. So that's quite a bit. So some of them named the streets for themselves. And then we got Court Street and Stage Road. We've got streets that denote the public use of them. Next slide, please. So this house is kind of interesting. These folks actually came to me and asked me to do a house history. That sometimes the house detective appears and she'll research the history of your house. But it was really interesting. This is a folk Victorian cottage. It's a gable front and wing, so it's just barely beyond being the hall and parlor. The railroads and the sawmills have changed the nature of construction of residential and commercial properties forever. So what we see here is a beautifully finished house. Now, I've been in this house extensively, and the front of it is very, very old. Once again, they have the brick fireplaces and the beautiful wide wooden floors. They even have the Victorian kind of the balance that goes between rooms over the door. This house was kind of interesting. The gentleman, Mr. McCallum, was a Civil War veteran who settled in Bartlett and got married, the family still lives, the descendants, the Coopers, they still live there today. So it's been continuously occupied by the same family for a really long time. I think they might have qualified for a historic marker. I think they might have gotten one from the Historical Commission here. So she was pretty proud of it. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is a beautiful house. This is the Graves Walker house. And you all are so blessed because you have all of these wonderful Gothic revival houses. I mean, even the 2 or 3 that you have are more than you have anywhere else in Shelby County, except, Elmwood has a Gothic revival cottage there that used to be the caretaker's house and is now the office. So we know it's Gothic revival because we always have the 3 gables. So if you're ever driving through a small town and you want to read the history of the town, and you see a house, even if it's abusively altered and they slap siding on the darn thing, if you see the 3 gables there, you know at one time that was really out in the country because Andrew Jackson Downing published. Andrew Jackson Davis and Andrew Jackson Downing. I don't know why. Oh, everybody was named after Andrew Jackson. Sorry. They published this incredibly influential book called like Victorian Cottages or something. Yeah, cottage residences and the architecture of country houses. So the style doesn't stay around a long time, but I think it's quite beautiful. And this particular house has been here since 1871. Has its 2 stories. So inside there's a big parlor, then there's kind of a hall on the other side, and all the bedrooms are upstairs. I didn't actually get to see the bedrooms, but we'll assume they were there. They have a photograph, which I couldn't find that one either. There's like one of the early residents sitting out on the roof of the porch. I'm like, why is she out there? Why are they taking a photo of her out there? But nonetheless, so this family had kind of an interesting history, and it's kind of odd in a way too. There was a death in there and an unhappiness over a will. There was actually the same thing on the house that the one that we looked at early on. That was the Midland Log House. A girl just died. I was like tracing her, and she's like 6 years old, and then she just disappears, and she should have been the heiress. And this was kind of that same way, but at any rate. But the woman that lives here had a photograph that was not of this house, and she swore up and down that they had completely come in and changed from this house that wasn't anywhere near as nice as this one, to this one, but it actually looked like the other one, and I finally just like, whatever. I've I've done my research, okay, I stand by it. So, but this is a great house too. Once again, one of your really great 19th century rare examples here that you all should be very proud of. I think we have maybe one more. Okay, so then we have the Gotten House, which I think is also the home of the Bartlett Historical Society. This too is a classic example. This is 1884. This is kind of retro because Gothic Revival didn't really stay around a long time, but they built this house as well. And as you can see, it's like what do you call this? It's a parapet. You know, the gables are on parapets, kind of, or a flat. Instead of having it as a separate gable, it's all part of the same plane there, and it gives it a really cool look. And I thought maybe it was older, but you know, Mr. Gotten didn't get here till after the Civil War, so you know, I had to kind of go with a date that I could find.
Ma'am?
Yes.
All of our research is 1871, and we have.
Oh, really? Okay.
Always.
Super. All right. Well, then I'm going to change that.
Okay.
So 1871 then for both this and the other house as well.
After the Civil War, and he got.
Okay. Great. Great. Well, I'm sorry. You know, I must have pulled this. There's that. Perry Magnus did a house history, and I think I probably got that date from hers. So she might have been mistaken. So thank you for telling me that. But the Gottens were a very influential family. And then this has the wonderful thing in the back that's southern, called a cat slide roof, which is basically when they put a rear addition on, but it's perfect plane with the other roof that was on there. So I can just imagine watching a cat slide down that roof. Up north they have a different name, Snowball or something, I don't know, at any rate. So once again, so we have two 1871 Gothic revivals here, and that's quite interesting. There are other interesting houses in your historic district, but we don't have time to go into them. I think this might be my last slide. Ta-da! It is. All right.
Questions? Does
Yes,
anyone have
yes.
questions?
Sure.
Have questions?
Well, no questions? Well, thank you for straightening me out on the date. So that's a brief tour of your historic district. I do think that you might want to think about updating your National Register nomination, because a lot of the houses over there probably were not 50 years of age when that nomination was prepared, but would now be contributing, which would give you a much stronger district. The other thing, and we were discussing this a little earlier, is if there, I would like to look, or have somebody look at the development of Bartlett after World War II and see if perhaps you have a mid-century a subdivision, because those are now becoming very popular as we recognize that too is a historic style, and we might be able to get you a second historic district. Okay?
Okay.
So thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so
Get to know you all and enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this, everybody knows Jane. Miss Sue, do you know Jane? Okay, all right. This is Jane Coleman Catone. Okay, good. I was hoping I would. All right, and she is the Tennessee Historical Commission coordinator. And we recently went to this gentleman's town and did some training with her, and so she has got a wealth of information in this beautiful head of hers. And so I'm gonna turn it over to you and you just share.
Well, thank
Okay?
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for promoting me. I actually coordinate the Certified Local Government Program at Tennessee Historical Commission. But I would love to coordinate the whole commission someday. That would be fantastic. So, the colorful page that I handed out, I kind of based this presentation off of that. And I didn't write it. I went to the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions conference in July, and they were handing these out, and I thought, how great. Ideas for what can you do as a local historical commission beyond getting certified as a certified local government? What do you do next? So that's kind of what this presentation is all about. So, and can I apologize? I have a few slides that kind of need there's multiple pictures, so I'll just kind of ask you to click through them as you go along. So we'll go to the next slide. So Judith told you about the architectural history and the significance there, and I'm going to talk about the preservation side. Why do we preserve history? We have different reasons for it. We have the social reasons, the heritage reasons that we want to preserve our culture and our values and our history. There's the economic reasons. Preservation can do a lot to revitalize towns. There's the tax incentives, business opportunities, heritage tourism, all those reasons. And the environmental, we really are trying to, I think the whole earth is trying to figure out how we can be more sustainable. And really the greenest building is the one that's built already, is what we like to say. You're recycling and reusing materials through preservation. So next slide, please. And I have a few different pictures. So the goals of historic preservation, there's different things you set out to do depending on your preservation project. Some preservation projects are about adaptive reuse, like Cummins Station here in Nashville. It was a warehouse that's now office space and retail and restaurants. If you click again, there's conservation. That's something like the Parthenon in Nashville. It's had a continuous use as an art museum since it was built. So they're trying to just conserve and keep it in good shape. They're not changing it really. There's redevelopment, that's in the picture. The Beale Street, it's been kind of revitalized, redeveloped, really changed into a tourism destination with nightlife and restaurants, bars. And then finally, you have interpretation, like the Hermitage or any other museum. And that's kind of how preservation got started. It was this, let's interpret our history, and it's kind of grown from there, that we do these different ways that we preserve and different reasons for preserving. So next slide. So how do we preserve? This kind of breaks down into two basic activities. The first is that we recognize and list historic resources like the ones that Judith went through, the National Register for this, survey work, just knowing what we have. And then the second big activity is the public policy and design tools for saving and preserving and fixing up these historic resources. Next slide. So you all know me, I think, but a little more about State Historic Preservation Office. Every state has one of these. In Tennessee, the Tennessee Historical Commission is the State Historic Preservation Office. And our director is the State Historic Preservation Officer, or SHPO. We have some state programs, like our markers. I think you have a few here in Bartlett, the TriStar ones, and state-owned historic sites. And then the federal programs is the side of things that I do, where we do the survey, the National Register. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. And the Certified Local Government Program that I don't have to explain to you too much, but I brought some extra brochures so you can find more about the CLG program on a national level. There's nearly 2,000 now across the country. You might have hit the 2,000 mark. And Bartlett has been one since 2002, because you have in Tennessee, just the main requirement is that you have to have a historic zoning commission. Next slide. So you got certified, now what? Go on. So this is kind of going off the worksheet here, is that you don't have to start from scratch. There's a lot of resources and guidance for how you can do preservation in your community between the National Historic Preservation Act. There's the program guidelines for Tennessee, and I can send you a copy of those if you'd like. That kind of deals with a lot of administrative stuff more. There's the Historic Preservation Fund manual. That's also a lot of administrative stuff, but it will tell you about what are the rules for grants. There's the state legislation for historic zoning, which your ordinance is based off of. Your local ordinance design guidelines and the Secretary of Interior standards. All of these are kind of the foundational documents that tell you how to do preservation in the community. Next slide. So the statewide survey is the foundation of everything. Our office is responsible for maintaining a statewide survey, and we've gone county by county. I don't know if the slide goes has a point about this, but we also count on our CLGs to help us with the survey. Because at this point, we're going county by county. We're still trying to get the 7 or 8 counties that haven't been surveyed at all put into the system. So we haven't been able to update things that were first surveyed in the 1970s or 80s. We update them as needed when sometimes projects come along, but so this is something as a CLG coordinator I'm working on, trying to have some consistency and give the CLGs guidance for doing survey work that's compatible with our system so that we can share information with each other and get this kind of all updated. And if you click on our picture, we have the survey now uploaded into a GIS. So as we add more data to it, it'll be possible to go online to the Tennessee Historical Commission viewer and search by address and see if it's a historic resource that's been surveyed. And it won't be a ton of information, but there'll usually be a photo and dates and just a brief physical description, architectural description, and a brief history. So I'm really excited about where things are going with technology and preservation. And we also have, so we have survey photos for everything that's been surveyed in the state, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is one of our biggest customers at using the survey information, they just paid to send, for the summer, they sent 3 temporary workers who spent the summer scanning all these photographs, and they're going to be uploaded into the GIS. So that's exciting, and maybe be a few years more, but the next step is probably to have closer connection to the CLGs to get their survey data put into this viewer.
Do we need to send any photos in that we have or anything that are already CLG?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of like something we'll be working towards once we have the capacity. And we're hopeful that our office will get us. We have 1 survey coordinator right now, Peggy. You may have met her. If she can we can get a second survey person. We'll have more capacity to, because it's not. I mean, collecting the survey is labor intensive, but getting it into the system is just even more so.
What about buildings like are scheduled for demolition? Do we need to get some photos of those in?
That's a good idea. That's
lost forever?
No, I mean that's certainly we do survey things that are going to be demolished, so we have that record of the style. It's not. Doesn't help us preserve it, but it helps us know more about the history of Tennessee architecture, for sure. Now we'll go to the next slide. So I think you all are pretty familiar with the National Register. Just a brief review that it could be buildings, sites, structures, objects, or whole districts. I think I had a few photos in there that just kind of, sites like battlefields, it's a common thing. Structures, can also be bridges or fountains, like an object, and then the whole districts. So we'll go to the next slide. So with your historic zoning, and you're all pretty familiar with this, but this is kind of, I think it's the most effective policy tool at saving historic buildings. The second, well, kind of up there with the tax credit incentives, is a pretty good policy tool for saving historic buildings. But everything's decided on the local level, where you have an ordinance passed to protect these buildings, and it should be consistent with the state enabling legislation for historic zoning that tells you kind of how you set it up. We'll go to the next slide. So some similarities between National Register districts and local districts. I didn't know the difference before I started this job even. It gets confused very frequently. Members of the public will often be confused about the different types of historic designation, because both kinds of districts or landmarks are going to be places that are associated with persons, events, or architecture that's made a significant contribution to American history. In a district, any kind of district, you'll have buildings that are contributing to the district, and non-contributing buildings will be those non-historic buildings that are just kind of within the boundaries. And both kinds of districts will go through a review process before they're designated as historic. Next slide. But with National Register districts, the authority behind that comes from the National Preservation Act of 1966, whereas with local districts, it's based on state enabling legislation, state law. With National Register districts, it's the federal government saying that this is worthy of preservation, and it goes through a state review board that my office, the Tennessee Historical Commission, administers. And with the local district, it's the local government, the city council, that's deciding to establish these things. And with national, this is the most important distinction. With National Register, it doesn't create any limits to the property owners whatsoever. It doesn't even prevent demolitions. It's an honorary designation that says this is worthy of preserving, and your certain benefits, grant benefits might be available to the National Register property. But the only time it's going to have any protection is if there's some federal funding involved. The federal government's not going to spend money on a project that will demolish a National Register district. So some like interstate roads and things like that will go through a review process before they just tear down a National Register antebellum home. You hope, yeah. But the local districts where it has teeth. That's the design review and the protections in place to keep those buildings intact. And for a local district or a local landmark, it can be, but it does not have to be listed in the National Register because they're different. So next slide, please. And then with the local districts, you're going to be using these Secretary of Interior standards as guidance for your own design guidelines for what's going to be appropriate and not appropriate in terms of changing the buildings. These Secretary of Interior standards, I think it's interesting. They developed as guidance for these tax credit projects, federal tax credits to give business owners the opportunity to rehabilitate a historic building rather than tear it down. If it was listed in the National Register, but they needed to be some kind of principles for, well, what's okay in terms of rehabilitating it. So I'm not going to go, there's a whole other presentation to go into the Secretary.
There's a lot of grants involved with that too.
Yes, so it started as this guidance for tax credits, and then they started using it for grants, and they started using it for Section 106 is the federal review process for federal projects. And they started using it, and in most states have their local historic zoning commissions follow the Secretary of Interior standards as well.
Approved for our second grant for the courthouse in downtown Bolivar with the National Park Service and Department of Interior on phase 2 of it. So not only can you get a grant for partial, but if it goes over and need more, then you're going to reapply again next year on the same project.
Yeah, for sure. No, and that's Bolivar has done a great job doing multiple grants over, stretching them out over different phases of the project. But the Secretary of Interior standards have been around since the 1970s, and since they're kind of guiding principles more than specific instructions, they've really held up well over time. Go to the next slide. So going back to the handout, number 2 is scope. I think it's easy to forget, I forget sometimes too, that the CLG program is about more than historic zoning. It's not, that's kind of what it's turned into over time, but we call it certified local government, it's not certified local historic zoning commissions. So it's the whole government, the elected officials, all the departments, they're part of it too. And that's why there are local partners in federal and state preservation efforts. So that's why we ask for your assistance with helping with the statewide survey and reviewing National Register nominations that might happen within your jurisdiction, education and outreach, things like today. And there's also the grants projects, and Bolivar has, through the, as a CLG, has applied for several grants for the courthouse over the years. Next slide. So 3 is order. You all seem very organized here, but it can always be a good idea to just take a look and make sure that all your documents and all of your records are safe and accessible. In any kind of government function, you want to have everything in good shape. I also think these days it's really great, you probably already have this, but put a lot of things on your website, all of the design guidelines, the ordinance, make that information available to people so that they know how it all works. The next slide. And one more thing about order, when you have your records, when you grant your COAs, it can be a really good idea to hold on to that pretty much permanently, because if that same property comes up for another project 10 years from now, it can be good to know, well, what was approved last time, and did they follow it the way they were supposed to? So number 4 is planning. I think a lot of some historic zoning commissions can get in the habit of not meeting very often when they don't have applications for COAs. But sometimes even when you don't have applications, there's still other things you can discuss, goals you can set, things about goals for surveying, for doing research, dividing up responsibilities, different kinds of preservation projects, pursuing grants, just making all of these kinds of plans. And we do a plan too. In our office, this is a screenshot of our plan, and we're up for it to do a new 10-year plan next year. It's going to be a pretty intensive process, but we use that plan as guidance for our grants because we rank the grant applications based on how they kind of fit in with our strategic goals. Number 5 is time. This kind of goes along with planning, but just creating a schedule, as simple as for your meeting dates as well as deadlines for your other kinds of projects, and also keeping track of your progress and activities so that you can report that in your annual report to your own stakeholders, but also to us at the state level. 26. It's action. This one's all about the advocacy, getting the word out and being advocates for protecting the historic resources. It can also be, I try to keep an eye on what's going on at the state level. Like there's different laws that get introduced that could have an impact on how we do historic preservation. So when I hear about something, I kind of try to inform the CLG so they know. I'm not trying to be an advocate or I'm not a lobbyist, but to give you the information to speak up if you see something that you think would have an impact on your local activities. And anytime, sometimes there's controversial cases that come through and the path forward is not so clear, I'm always a phone call or email away to help out if there's a sticky situation. Yeah, go to the next slide. So communication is really important for a historic zoning commission. Communicating with your elected officials to make sure they understand what the ordinance and the policy is, and also to communicate with staff and other city departments, like codes enforcement, and you all have your historic zoning commission staffed by your planning office, but not every city does. The planners and the codes enforcement, they really make things run, so they need to know. Neighborhood associations are great partners to communicate with, also property owners. There's some places that have maybe somewhat larger districts, but they'll send out welcome baskets when someone moves into the neighborhood so that they know, like, hey, you've moved into the historic district, aren't you? We're so glad to have you. Here's some information.
I do have a question. So we're talking about creating a welcome packet, because what we've noticed, we've had in the historic district, a lot of homes are being rented out, and we have renters moving into homes and they're not aware that they're in the historic district. Do you guys offer any, because we can build it from scratch, but it'd be great if there was something we can pull from a website to kind of explain.
Yeah, I want to educate.
Yes.
Yeah, I might check with Brownsville.
Okay.
Because I know they have been doing these welcome packets for a long time.
Okay.
So I can ask for you, but you
Okay.
can also get in touch with them
Okay.
directly. Get a checklist of exactly what goes in that welcome
Yes,
packet.
that would be great.
Because they do it, and they're the ones who gave me the idea too to reach out. People have been reaching out to realtors for a long time to educate them, but in Brownsville, they also have information available at the banks.
Okay.
So that when people are getting their loan, their
Yeah.
mortgage loan, they have, Chamber of Commerce knows all about it too. So they don't, in Brownsville, they've really gotten on top of it where I don't think they have a problem really with people not knowing about the
Okay.
historic district. People always come to get their COA
Okay.
in Brownsville.
Okay, that's good, okay. We'll
Yeah.
follow
Give
up
all
on
of
that.
ours to realtors,
Yeah.
for sure. We'll make sure the
And the
realtors-
realtors too, some places will even organize I think takes a little while to get it approved, but realtors need their continuing education, and you can do a preservation workshop for them, and they'll learn about it all.
know that.
And then they'll get their continuing education credits
Okay.
that they need.
Okay, thank you.
They do those
Yeah.
in Nashville. It'd be probably pretty great to do one like Shelby County
Yeah.
was. But you've got, two CLGs in Shelby, maybe 3 in Shelby County alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you could do a partnership, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll show up because they need those
They need the
credits.
license.
Right.
Good, that's good to know.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. And the next slide. So, where 8 is the acknowledgement part. I think you all do this, but really the markers and plaques are the kind of the most visible things, like, good job. Not only this is historic, but also you did a good job preserving it. Any acknowledgement goes a long way. And to on all levels, to your staff, to the public, to elected officials, anyone who's done something to help with the preservation effort. The next slide. So education, you kind of talked about this already. But I think education there's 2 things that are important. Keeping your commissioners educated about the details and the policies so they can make fair decisions is really important, and in that outreach education to the public so they know that this is the thing and that they need to get their COA, and to get them excited, and also to give people resources to take care of their historic homes or businesses. And there's different ways you can do education, workshops like this one, but I'm getting kind of excited about next year. I think I'm going to start doing webinars
That's awesome.
out of our office because we have this new,
Software application.
well, it's just like a video conferencing system they set up in our main meeting area.
Awesome.
But people can log in and can do a presentation like this one, but just remotely, and
That's
people
awesome.
can listen in. So, and I'm going to try to do them on like different topics, so that people can just have their continuing education. But there's other webinars out there on the national level. Different preservation organizations do that. There's podcasts. If anyone listens to podcasts, the Maryland Trust does one called Preservecast, and I listen to it when I go on walks. It's pretty nice. And then there's the conferences, like NAPC conference. I think I have a slide about grants. We have grants available for bigger trainings with professional people coming in. And sometimes a few CLGs in an area will get together and collaborate to maybe all put in a little bit of money for the match to have something on kind of a bigger scale. So that can be good. We'll go to the next slide. So tools, it can be good to do like an assessment of all the tools you have, the ones that on a local level. You might have a preservation plan, you might have your survey. You also have some tools that are available from us, the SHPO, the technical assistance, tax credits. We can guide people through that. There's a potential tax credit project and the grants. We'll talk more about grants in a minute. And then there's the national organizations that can give good resources and tools. The National Park Service Preservation Briefs are, I think we'll go to the next slide. The tax credit projects. I still haven't been to Crosstown
Oh, you
Motors.
have to go.
I might go today. It's not on my way out of town, but I might just drive by anyway. Because this just won a National Trust Award.
Oh, did it? Really?
Yes,
Wow.
is the best tax credit project in the country last year.
Wow.
So really
Some
something
great
to be
restaurants in there too.
proud of. Next slide. Our grant funds, we have two types of grants. The brick and mortar grants, like the Bolivar Courthouse has gotten to rehab buildings that are in the National Register. And the planning grants, much more varied kinds of projects between planning and survey, and I have a couple pictures, I think.
Could you use a grant for an intern?
That's a good question. I might ask.
Okay.
Possibly.
Okay.
I think it would be depending on what the project the intern
So
is
we've
doing.
been talking about for our survey, we need to update our survey, and we were going to approach the University of Memphis to see if they would do it for free. But if that fails, I was wondering if we could try to get an intern.
Yeah, I think the way that would work is that it would be a grant to do survey, and that would be what you are paying for is the intern. And Claudette Stager, our deputy director, knows like the Historic Preservation Fund grants manual inside and out. She'll know exactly how to, like, legally that could work.
Okay.
But I think it's a possibility.
Okay.
Sometimes it can be a little tricky with interns because if they're not professionals yet, it might be like a minimum wage kind of situation. But we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I have a couple pictures on this slide I'm going to click through. Yeah, just so, this was in Knoxville. They have a plan to expand a historic district that we funded. Another picture, I think, is, let's go to the next slide. We got design guidelines. We have grants to hire consultants like Judith to can rework a design guidelines document, bring it up to date. This was a training workshop that we funded in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and East Tennessee. The National Alliance of Preservation Commissions has this great program called CAMP, Commission Assistance Mentorship Program. And you get really top-notch preservationists from all over the country fly in and do really one of the best trainings I've ever been to. From, like, they talk about from a legal perspective and advocacy and policy.
How did they get that?
So Jonesboro and Johnson City and Elizabethton got together and put the matching funds towards a grant, and they got a grant from our office. So between the three of them, it wasn't that much money. I think they probably each put in $1,000 or something and had this. So, and there hasn't been one in West Tennessee for a couple of years. There was one in Savannah. Did anyone come to that? Yeah. Okay. That was the camp.
That was okay. I couldn't remember the title, but it was good.
Yeah. And I try to kind of base the CLG training off of that a little bit, but I can't do the job that they do. I mean, because they really are professionals. All right, I can go to the next slide. Yeah, so some national organizations to be aware of. The National Park Service is kind of the government, federal government side. All the preservation programs are run through them. They publish the preservation briefs that used to be printed pamphlets. Now they're all online. And they'll tell you everything from brick and mortar to investigation to window repair, all sorts of great tips on the technical services side. And then the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, that's a nonprofit group, and that's like it's like a professional organization that different local preservation commissions can join. And that's something to consider. I think they have a sliding scale membership rate, and there's a few CLGs in Tennessee that are members of this organization.
What are the benefits of joining?
So they have some resources available for free without joining, like they have sample design guidelines that you can look at. But if you do join, they have a listserv, like an email thing where you can go and ask everyone else who's a member questions and people get back to you like right away. There are a few other resources that they offer, but I think it's something to consider. I'm trying to get some of the bigger CLGs to really consider it, but there's some resources available through them even without membership. We'll go to the next slide. So this is the last one. Just remember your people and your partnerships. It starts with having a good, interested people serving on your local historic zoning commission, but also the partnerships can be expanded through the CLG program and through NAPC if that's something you'd like to explore. But I think having a good commission and being a CLG is really a great start. So thank you for being one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions? I guess that was kind of fast, but it's okay.
Any questions?
Yes.
I'm with the Historical Society, and I had someone call me the other day asking, they have a house in the historic district, and they had it assessed, and it's going to be quite expensive to renovate it. But they would like to renovate it, but they can't afford it. So are there any grants available for something like that?
Unfortunately, at this point, private homes they're not disqualified from applying for grants from our office, but our brick and mortar grants are so competitive that our priority goes towards buildings that are publicly owned or have a public use. So we kind of tell people that on the front end before they decide to take the time to fill out the grant application. Some cities, Knoxville is doing it, I know Nashville is considering doing it, will have a local grant program where it's a fund to help mostly indigent, but also just people who don't have the means to do their historic renovations.
Because he wants to keep the house, but he said it's quite a lot of money to do it. He doesn't think he can afford it. You don't have any suggestions of any place he can like to go? Yeah.
So Shelby County has a housing grant to help with individual houses, and we have a pamphlet with the information about that in our office.
I referred him to your office.
Then he might have already called.
Yeah, he called me this week.
Yeah.
But I didn't know of anything. I didn't know you had that. So I told him, I said, I don't know if they can help you, but if they can't, they might be able to tell you where to go. So what is it, a local?
It's through Shelby County Housing.
Okay.
And it's basically CDBG money. And we have a pamphlet. You could apply through the Shelby County Housing Office.
Okay.
For the grant.
I'm going to come get a copy of that. Okay. All right, thank you.
And the good thing is if it's CDBG money, that's federal funds, and they know about historic preservation, and they know that certain projects would meet those Secretary of Interior standards. So federal government uses those standards for any projects that are going to have.
There's some hope there. We hear that quite often. People want to renovate and just don't have the finances.
Yeah. I think it can be kind of eye-opening too that sometimes doing the historic renovations, depending on the materials and methods used, are not always just so much more than replacement materials. Or you can do a replacement vinyl clad window that might be cheaper right now, but it's going to need to be replaced much sooner than if a historic window is repaired. But yeah, I know it's not, that's one of the biggest challenges in preservation work is knowing that it can be more expensive. So that's why Knoxville has created their fund. And they've gotten pretty creative, so not to get like too far into the weeds with policy, but this Section 106 review, when there's a federal project that might have an adverse effect on a historic resource, our office reviews those, but we don't have the power to actually stop a project. We just will review it and say, okay, this is not having an effect, or this is having an adverse effect on something historic. And then the federal agency will consider changing the project to minimize that effect. If they're not able to, if the project still has to go through and a building's going to be lost, they go through what's called a mitigation to kind of offset the losing. And a lot of times that mitigation is just money that is put towards some other kind of preservation. In Knoxville, they've worked it out where a lot of if there's mitigation money coming from various things, they'll put that into a pool that is then used to fund this local grant program to help people take care of their historic homes. So,
are they fundraising to support that, or?
I mean, I think it's mostly funded through this, the mitigation money. And maybe there's some CDBG money in there too. I'm not sure. You could check with the preservation planner in Knoxville about where exactly they get that money. But it's been pretty successful, and I think it's kind of been like good seed money for other. Like I know there was a big Victorian house in a historic district in Knoxville that was lived in by a man who was, I think he was disabled, he wasn't able to work, and the house had gotten into really bad shape. And he got some money from the city to put towards repairs, and then the neighborhood just kind of rallied and got together, and they all painted his house.
Wow.
So the volunteer work too. And maybe that would be, an option here if the money's not there. But I don't, even like the Boy Scouts or different groups that would be able to help with repairs and teach the next generation about preservation.
When we got the Alton House, when the Historical Society got it, it was not in real good condition. And we had the Boy Scouts help us several times do particularly outside work.
That's awesome.
The FFA too, but they don't do that anymore. At the high school, they had a teacher there that did a lot of agricultural things, and he helped us with the outside a lot. So that's a very good idea.
I remember my church youth group used to do projects like this. It wasn't preservation exactly, but it could have been. Painting. Not all preservation work needs some highly qualified craftsmen. Sometimes it's just painting or cleaning things up.
And kids are always looking for community projects to do. High school students are.
Yes,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, Brad
This has been a very
construction has a heart for preservation.
I do.
And has a heart for construction, so that's a great fit.
But not for public speaking. So this morning, I was gonna get up out of bed and I was gonna call in Rich because I bought 5 tickets last night. Here I am.
Yeah.
That comes back to money. We had some, it seemed like today the discussion has been money. Everything comes back to money. So the question she had a while ago is the prospect of a person who's bought a historical property. And I get this all the time. First thing out of their mouth, they call me and say, can you meet with me on this historical property? Actually, I'm meeting Monday on a Fletcher Sloan historical property. I talked about Fletcher Sloan in Bolivar because he's got such an impact there. But she's purchased a property since the last time we met. It's called The Gardens. It was built by Fletcher Sloan in 1873. It's I don't know, Gothic revival with a little bit of fretwork on the exterior with the gables and typical Fletcher Sloan look. And so meet with her Monday on that. And I know the first question out of her mouth is going to be, how much is this going to cost me? Because she has a passion for restoration too. Just a moment ago, you'd asked a question about money and restoration and cost and things like that. So I'm going to change my topic today on that, because that seems like the question of the day. So should you renovate, restore, or remodel? Those are all three different topics there. First of all, what I categorize everything in is restoration, which is the act of returning a structure to its former condition. Restoration would be like a log cabin, an old public building that was built in the 1860s. We're going to restore it. We're not going to add new restrooms. We're not going to add new wings. We're not going to add different types of roofs. We're going to restore the structure as it was originally constructed. The next categorization would be renovation. Renovation is the act of renewing. To simplify this, it's making a room or entire building look better by fixing what's already there. And when you renovate something, you may come across an old sink and you can't restore it, so you have to get a new sink. So you put a new sink in. You're not taking out walls. You're not creating new ceilings or new lights. You know, you might have an old light fixture and you find one like that light fixture and you put in there. That's a renovation, not a restoration. And then the other category would be remodeling. Now, remodeling is where the expense comes in. That's where you're taking out walls, you're putting on additions, you're putting on carports, bedrooms, bathrooms, and things like that. So when people say, I bought an old property and I want to restore it, well, out of those three that we just touched on, restoration is your least expensive route, because you're not adding, you're just restoring. And when you restore, like we talked about just a minute ago, you're repairing holes in the walls, you're fixing old fixtures, you're replacing them with replicas, you're removing carpet that someone may have put in there, and then you're finishing the old hardwood floors under it. So that's restoration. So in restoration, I come across the problems of molding that was created 100 years ago. So a lot of contractors, and the way I became a contractor, I was design build at first. I was an architectural design. So I'd come in and I'd design the building, the architecture in the building, restoration or remodeling or whatever the case may be. But if it come back to restoration, we would have to duplicate the moldings to put it back like it was. So I would they would put me in contact with their contractor. And their contractor says, well, we can't do this because you can't get these moldings anymore. Well, okay, so I fought that battle for years, and I said, forget this, I'm going to get my contractor's license. So I went out 5 years ago and got a contractor's license. So after that, the phone has been ringing off the wall, because we are restoring. And we're restoring by taking the building and putting it back like it was. And the way we do it, and the contractors today don't understand this, and I brought a few samples. So you had an old molding in a house. This is just your basic crown molding that you see in a lot of houses today. I didn't bring anything ornate. But we have an old molding. It may have a different curvature to it than what the new moldings do. So we take a piece of the old molding out of the structure. We cut it just like this sample. And I send it off to a guy that makes me the knife. And he creates these knives by hand. And when he creates them, he takes a blank piece of steel and he lays it on here and he makes a little score line. And after he does that, we create the old molding that was in the house. However it may be. You know, we have thousands of knives, because a lot of these structures are unique. I'll never use a knife again. But you know, I can get these made for a couple $100. But then I put them in storage, and a lot of time, if that down the road, if that customer calls me back and says, I need this one redone, I'll write the name on it, what house it was, where I did the job. So, you know, there's all different types of little knives. Like if I need to do a little fluting, we call this fluting. You see this on larger columns, like in the doorways. You might see it this wide with a pediment above it. And so we make the little knife. And recreates your moating. So, if you get a guy that says, I can't do that, then you got the wrong guy. If he can't restore a house, he can remodel one and he can renovate one, but if he can't restore one, then you need to find somebody else. Now, when we go to, I'm sorry.
I'd like to say one thing about money on that topic.
Yes.
It's interesting to hear you say that restoration is actually the least expensive option. I think that's kind of myth busting right there, for sure. And one thing I struggle with when I'm going across the state and selling the idea of preservation, people say, well, we just can't afford to keep up our homes with that. And I understand that concern, I really do. However, but I try to say, well, the goal of the Historic Preservation Commission is not to, make people do things they can't afford. It's to keep people from spending a lot of money to mess these historic houses up, because that's what they do. They'll spend a lot of money to put like a completely inappropriate addition or treatment on the house.
That's right. I see it all the time. They'll take a historically correct property that hasn't been touched in years, and they'll add a new modern addition to it. And what they end up with is worse than what they started with, because they've just gone down the wrong direction. And usually that comes from the contractor leading them in that direction.
But that's a phrase we say a lot, my colleagues and I, when we're doing field work, we'll be like, wow, they spend a lot of money messing that up.
A lot of money. But that's true. Restoration is the least expensive route that you can take. And a lot of people, and it's a gray area there, a lot of people get restoration and remodeling confused, because they come in and they want the new kitchens and the new open concepts, and they want to tear out ceilings and make them vaulted, and that's a renovation. That's not a restoration. But if you have someone that has a historic property and they want to keep it correct, then they shouldn't be frightened over money, because it's cheaper to do that. Like I said, these knives, they don't cost much. They just need to contact somebody that does that. But on renovation, a lot of people think, well, this is too plain for me. I want something a little bit more grandeur, something. So, and you come and look at this. It looks like an antique piece of molding that was, 100, 200 years, plastic.
Wow.
So even if you can't find the knives of the contractor, there's websites where you can buy the molding already. And this is pennies on the dollar compared to wood and a craftsman recreating something. And it's still historically correct. There's a lot of moldings out there today that are historically correct, like was put in the Vanderbilt homes that was constructed, the old Great American houses. You can buy these for pennies on the dollar anywhere on the web, and to me it's acceptable to use because you're replicating, but people don't know how to notice like this. But in a house, it's more stable than wood because it's not expanding and contracting. It's a stable material. I don't like to, because I like true restoration, but there are options if a person gets to, here's a piece that hasn't been finished. This is what you order. It's just in white plastic polyethylene. It's already primed. And you can come in and put any color you want, paint it white or whatever. What this is the way this started out. And then we faux finish it. It's glazing and gold leafing. Fun process. I mean, it's fun to me. I enjoy it. So, it's a fun process to go through, taking a molding like this and giving it a old historic look. This was done about 2 months ago.
So we have a lot of people coming in who have homes and they're about to make whether renovations or restorations. What are some questions they should ask a potential contractor?
Well, the first thing they should do, Jane talked about this a while ago, is when you're considering buying a historic property, go to the city hall and they can guide you in the guidelines that are set up for historic districts, what can and what can't be done. I don't know if all the guidelines are the same, Jane.
They are all For all CLGs, they're all going to be based off the Secretary of Interior standards, but guidelines are going to be specific to the kinds of architectural styles that are prevalent in the.
Yeah, we had a historical zoning commission meeting last week in Bolivar, and on the topic was the theater in Bolivar, and we took down the old marquee, which was just a sign placard out front. And the topic of the meeting was the new marquee going in place, because the old marquee was dilapidated and we can't get letters for it anymore. It's just out of date. And we received a facade grant on that building, and this sign would be covered under that facade grant. And the topic was an LED marquee. What do we do? Because the old one was the original marquee in a metal frame with letters you put in and out and things like that, 1940 model. And so a lot of discussion went into that, you know, can we go with LED? And we had to look at the guidelines, and then we also contacted Jackson, Tennessee, that has a restoration project on theater downtown, and they did a LED marquee. And we also contacted the state of Tennessee and asked them about their input on this. And if you're going back with a marquee like we did, and we got the LED marquee approved, but it was under the circumstance that some of the guidelines, you can't get the old marquees, but you can get these new ones. And this one was recessed back in the building and not on the street side, not on the face of the building, right on the street, because we had a little pocket there where the marquee was. So we was able to get that. Do I agree with it completely? No, but we need a marquee to show who's coming to the theater. So you have to have some leniency in some things. But what would you think on that, Jan?
Well, I mean, it sounds like you did, excuse me, your best to kind of follow the standards, because you can sort of like, you go through these steps. You know, the first standard says that you should repair rather than replace, but if you can't, then you do your best to replace in kind. But you know, if you can't, then you do your best to you know, simulate something that looks similar or keeps in the same kind of feeling as the original. So you kind of, if you go through the steps carefully, I think you can make a good decision.
And that was our topic, so exactly what you spoke of just then, the process we went through. Can we repair the old one? Well, no, because we couldn't get the letters that fit the old one anymore. No one manufactured them. So what we did on the LED, we got a casement that looks like the old one to put it in. So we got some old aspects of the old marquee, and then we've got the LED coming. And it would have never passed if it had been protruding out on the street or something like that in the historic district. So it was approved, and I think it would be good for the theater. Being a theater too. Now, if it was a business, it'd be a different topic. You know, you couldn't put an LED marquee on just a business, a clothing store or something. So being a theater, that helped us on that. So, but going back to the three processes there, you know, your most expensive is remodeling. You know, changing the structure form. When you change a form, you have to dig footings, you have to come in and look at putting in upstairs, changing the whole structure, which if it's in a historic district, you basically can't do it unless you have a high dollar paid architect that can make the structure look like it doesn't have an addition. Sometimes you can get those passed in historic zoning areas, as long as the details are there of the existing building. But your renovation is the most, remodeling is the most expensive process of doing any type of construction on the building. So, you know, renovate, restore, remodel, the biggest bang for the buck. It's a gray area in each one of them. It depends on the condition of the building, it depends on when the structure was built. Today, we're faced with a demolition by neglect. We touched on that on our last meeting. You know, that's just everywhere because it's just an easy out. You know, the person says, well, I don't have the money to restore this building, or the building is gone beyond repair. But to me, if you have two good walls, you still have a good building. You know, because you've got something to start with. But if the building has imploded upon itself and the walls are all gone and the windows, then demolition by neglect is a route that you would take, but it should be the last resource. But on the grants that Jane was talking about earlier, on the brick and mortar, we're on phase 2 of the renovation of the Hardeman County Courthouse, which is a Fletcher Sloan design building, architect design. And brick and mortar, it kind of sounds like, well, you're not going to get a grant except for brick and mortar. Well, that's kind of true, but it's not. When you're doing a brick and mortar grant, it covers like the old windows in the structure, any rot on them, and you want to replace it with like materials. You can't take an old window out and put in a new vinyl window. You have to come back and restore the window, take the window out and take out the rot and put like materials back in. So under brick and mortar, windows are covered. You know, a lot of them are glazed, and we try to go back if we have a broken pane or something. We get there's a company that still makes the old glass that's laid on the marble, poured on marble, where you got the little waviness in it. So you can still get those things. So also in the Hardeman County Courthouse, we have the soffit, which is the overhang of the building. We have a lot of corbels that look like it's real ornate, holding up the overhang of the building. So we recreate all those also with knives and different aspects. So that's also covered under brick and mortar.
And I'll say something about the misleading name for that kind of grant. I mean, it's better than what we used to call those kinds of rehabilitation grants, that acquisition and development grants. Mm-hmm. And I think acquisition from once upon a time, kind of an older model of preservation, we had grant funds available to let public entities buy historic property with the aim of further developing it and fixing it up. We don't really do that anymore. We're very unlikely to give you a grant to actually make a purchase for a property, but it used to be that way. So we stopped calling them the acquisition and development grants and started kind of saying, for brick and mortar projects, the physical adaptive reuse or rehabilitation projects. So that's
on the brick and mortar, what's covered is
that you already know.
Yeah, so it's a little misleading name, because I was listening to that a while ago. It's like brick and mortar, and I'm like, well, I'm involved in one of those right now, and we have different things.
Brick and mortar.
Yeah, brick and mortar. It's an easy way just to categorize the building. It is a public building, and as far as grants goes, I mean, I started out in design build, architectural design, and then I got into construction, and now all of a sudden I'm in the middle of talking about grants and things like this, and that's not my expertise at all, but I'm learning every day. But on the grants, all your grants are basically approved on public buildings, pretty much. If you have a private individual, unless, I meant to ask Jane a while ago, I have heard some, for instances, if something historically happened on a private property, like an individual was there or died,
Well, not so much that, because buildings are, we treat all of the National Register buildings kind of the same.
Okay.
Whether or not there's different ways they can be significant, either for their architecture or because of significant events or people associated with them. What we do with grants sometimes is it doesn't have to be owned by the city or the county to be kind of considered a public building. If you have a local nonprofit museum, historical society that has a house, and the city agrees to partner and actually apply for the grant, you can get the CLG treatment, the extra points, even though it's not for a publicly owned building, but it still has this public use or nonprofit use. So it's just kind of, it all depends on the applications that come in, how competitive it's
I was just curious if it was a famous person's house, like who's the singer that just passed and her birthplace was here in Memphis?
Aretha Franklin.
Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
Would that have any impact?
Well, I think that would, if there's a nonprofit group that is, like Claiborne Temple is a nonprofit. There's a Claiborne Reborn nonprofit, and they've gotten quite a few grants from our office. So it's about it's not so much about the history, but more about the use of the property. If it's going to be a museum or restored for some kind of public purpose, community purpose, then they might be able to get a grant.
So is your courthouse being used as a courthouse?
It is.
Okay.
It's still an active courthouse. We have what we call the little courthouse in Bolivar, and it's the only, the way I understand it, it's the only standing, still usable, but it's a tourist, we have it as a museum now, still usable log courthouse in the state of Tennessee.
Wow.
I can't think of any other ones, and that's what I've been told.
Yeah.
That
Is it in its original location?
it's not in its original location. It was moved, but
But not far.
Not far,
Yeah.
not far at all. But
That's awesome.
you know, Bolivar was destroyed by a lot of fires in the mid-1800s. So the buildings you see there were erected in the 1870s, 1860s, and the courthouse where it stands now is the second structure there, not including the little courthouse, which is still intact. But the little courthouse, I'm working with the county mayor at the moment, and he's not a historically inclined person. He's a younger generation that it doesn't mean anything to him, and he's wanting to give it away. And so we're kind of in a little
Discussion.
yes discussion. That's a good term, discussion now.
Who does he
And
want to
so,
give it to? Who does he want to give it to?
well, he doesn't
Who would want a
know.
courthouse?
It still has, you know, it's you can still see the logs. They're still exposed, and it
Why would
had.
you want to give that away?
Well, it comes back to historical restoration and upkeep. You know, he's all about the dollar, saving the dollar.
They did that in Roane County in East Tennessee. The county moved out of the courthouse and they were going to tear it down.
Mhm.
And it was very historically significant because it's an antebellum courthouse and there's only like 6 or something of those left in the whole state. And it was also the site of the capital for a day when Tennessee was moving east, and they stopped in Kingston, and it was the capital of Tennessee for a day, and it was that, you know, that site. So anyway, the county moved out, and this was the 1970s, and not a great preservation time, and a local group got together to save the courthouse, and they convinced the county to give it to them, and they incorporated it as a nonprofit heritage group. So they run it as a museum now. Yeah, and it's a pretty nice museum. But I think if they had the choice, I think they would have liked to have continued to be a courthouse. But counties tend to move out of their courthouses.
I've approached the APTA in Bolivar chapter to take it over, but they don't have the money to upkeep it. So, you know, I think it would qualify for a grant, being the only standing log cabin courthouse in Tennessee, more
Yeah.
likely.
Perhaps. I think we want to look into to be some kind of perhaps exception made depending on when it was moved. But if it's been in its location for a long time.
It's probably, I would say it's probably been in the same location over 80 years.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, if it was long as it wasn't moved, 20 years ago.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's historically correct, and everything about it, and it wouldn't take much money to get it revitalized, because we're just looking at replacing a few rotted windows and paint, and getting the AC stabled in it, because it stays shut up so much, mold and mildew and things like that. So we're talking, $30,000 to $40,000 to get it back in place. And so, we just have all kind of folks out there. The younger generation, they don't understand historical, keeping the historical aspects of the town and how valuable it is. So, but that's what we're faced with today. I'm sure everyone is. So, any questions? I didn't have a long spiel. I had a different thing I was going to do today, but we started talking about remodeling and renovation, and I thought, well, I'll just touch on that today instead of.
So do you consult if someone?
I do.
Okay.
I started out as a consultant.
Okay.
Architectural design consultant.
Okay.
That's the way I started 25 years ago.
Okay.
And then it's just evolved, and so now we're doing construction, renovation, of restoration projects. So it's just, it's changing every day. I never know what I'm going to be doing from day to day. You know, that's one thing about it. I never sought this career. It was just something that I loved. And, you know, if you seek a career money-wise only, you'll never be successful. But if you do something you love, success will follow.
Yes.
So I'm just doing what I love.
That's awesome.
And if I can help you guys anyway, you know, I'm just 60 miles down the road. I'll be glad to drive over anytime. I'm here about every weekend anyway, going to estate sales. That's my other passion, is buying old furnishings at estate sales. So.
Anybody have any questions? Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed coming down, and sorry that I changed my subject.
No, this is
It seemed like it was a good topic to speak
Yes,
on.
absolutely it was. Does anybody else have any comments, questions? In the room. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Kevin, thank you for filming.